Why God is hard for man to define. Defining God is one of the most enduring and complex challenges in human history. The difficulty stems from a combination of theological, philosophical, and linguistic factors. Here are some of the key reasons why God is hard for man to define. 1. The divine-human gap, infinite versus finite. The most fundamental reason, from a theological perspective, is the vast chasm between the Creator and the created. God is transcendent and infinite. Many major religions define God as a being that is transcendent, existing outside of and beyond the physical universe. God is described as infinite, eternal, omnipotent, all-powerful, omniscient, all-knowing, and omnipresent, present everywhere. Man as immanent and finite. In contrast, humans are finite creatures, limited by time, space, and a physical body. Our minds and language are structured to understand and describe the world of our experience, a world of cause and effect, time, and physical objects. Trying to define an infinite being with finite concepts is like trying to hold the ocean in a cup. We can get a glimpse, but we can't contain it all. This inherent limitation means that any human definition of God will always be incomplete and inadequate. As the Bible says in Isaiah 55:8-9, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways and my thoughts than your thoughts." 2. The problem of anthropomorphism. Humans naturally try to understand the unknown by relating it to what they know. This leads to anthropomorphism, the attribution of human characteristics, emotions, and forms to God. Linguistic necessity. The very act of speaking or writing about God often requires using human language. We talk about God having a hand, eyes, or hearing our prayers. We describe God's emotions like love, anger, and grief. These terms are necessary for communication and to make the divine relatable, but they can also be misleading if taken literally. The risk of limitation. If we describe God as a father, we might unconsciously project the limitations or flaws of human fathers onto the divine. If we say God walked in the garden, we might forget that God is spirit and not bound by a physical body. While anthropomorphism can make God feel more personal, it also risks reducing God to a magnified human, which contradicts the core theological concept of God's transcendence. 3. The multiplicity of concepts. The word God is not a single, universally agreed upon concept. It is an umbrella term that encompasses thousands of different ideas from different cultures and religions. Diverse religious views. The monotheistic God of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam is often defined differently than the polytheistic gods of ancient Greek or Roman mythology, or the pantheistic God of Hinduism, which sees the universe itself as divine. Contradictory attributes. Even within a single tradition, there are often conflicting attributes. The God described as all-loving and just is also portrayed as a source of judgment and wrath. These apparent contradictions, known as the problem of evil, make a single, coherent definition difficult, if not impossible, for many. 4. The limits of reason and experience. Philosophical and empirical approaches also highlight the challenge of defining God. Philosophical arguments. Philosophers have spent centuries debating the existence and nature of God using logical arguments, example the ontological, cosmological, and teleological arguments. However, these arguments are often met with equally compelling counter-arguments and, even if successful, can only prove the existence of a first cause or designer, not the personal God of a specific religion. Subjectivity of experience. Many people's understanding of God comes from personal, spiritual, or mystical experiences. These experiences, by their very nature, are subjective, cannot be replicated in a laboratory, and are difficult to articulate using objective language. What one person experiences as a divine presence, another might explain through psychology or neuroscience. Ultimately, the difficulty in defining God stems from the paradox of trying to understand an infinite, non-physical, and transcendent being with a finite mind, a limited language, and through an inherently subjective lens. Many theologians and philosophers would argue that a perfect definition is not the goal, rather, it is the ongoing process of seeking and relating to the divine that constitutes true understanding. White Paper: The Theological and Epistemological Challenges of Defining God in the Context of Megascale Data Centers and the Gospel Geek Lab's Mission. Abstract. The endeavor to define God confronts profound theological and epistemological challenges, rooted in the infinite nature of the divine and the finite capacities of human cognition. For the Gospel Geek Labs, which seeks to integrate theology with technology through megascale data centers, these challenges are amplified by the tension between divine transcendence and the empirical frameworks of modern computational infrastructure. Megascale data centers, processing 181 zettabytes of data by 2025 and powering AI with investments projected at $7 trillion by 2030, offer unprecedented tools for exploring spiritual questions, yet they underscore the limitations of human constructs in capturing God's essence. This white paper examines why defining God is inherently difficult, integrating theological exegesis, philosophical inquiry, and technical insights into data centers to propose how the Gospel Geek Labs can leverage these facilities to advance its faith-based narrative while aligning with the Tov/Tob framework, Genesis 1:31, for divine goodness. It provides strategies for incorporating these challenges into your book, reflecting your mission as the digital shepherd to bridge faith and technology. Table of Contents Introduction. Background: the Gospel Geek Labs and Megascale Data Centers. Methodology. Theological and epistemological challenges of defining God. 4.1 Divine transcendence and human finitude. 4.2 Linguistic and conceptual limitations. 4.3 Cultural and historical variability. 4.4 Secularization and modern epistemologies. Role of megascale data centers in theological exploration. 5.1 Computational power for spiritual narratives. 5.2 AI-driven theological insights. 5.3 Data analytics for community engagement. Narrative integration into the Gospel Geek Labs book. 6.1 Plotlines exploring the ineffability of God. 6.2 Character arcs grappling with divine mystery. 6.3 Thematic reflections on faith and technology. 6.4 Symbolism of data centers as theological metaphors. Challenges and mitigation strategies. 7.1 Balancing theological depth and accessibility. 7.2 Ethical use of AI in spiritual contexts. 7.3 Environmental impacts of data centers. Recommendations for literary and missional integration. Conclusion. Bibliography. 1. Introduction. Your inquiry into why God is hard for humans to define, in the context of integrating megascale data centers into your book for the Gospel Geek Labs, addresses a profound theological and epistemological question. God, as an infinite and transcendent being, eludes comprehensive human definition due to the limitations of language, cognition, and cultural frameworks. Megascale data centers, hyperscale facilities processing exabytes of data and powering AI with investments projected at $7 trillion by 2030, offer computational tools to explore spiritual questions, yet their empirical nature underscores the gap between human constructs and divine reality. This white paper examines the challenges of defining God, leveraging theological exegesis, example Psalm 139:16, Isaiah 55:8-9, philosophical inquiry, and technical insights into data centers. It proposes narrative strategies for your book to reflect the Gospel Geek Labs Tov/Tob guided mission, Genesis 1:31, to advance discipleship, evangelism, and community building, aligning technology with divine purpose in a secularizing world. 29% U.S. nuns in 2025, FAMI, 2025.2. Background: the Gospel Geek Labs and Megascale Data Centers. The Gospel Geek Labs, led by you as the digital shepherd, seeks to bridge theology and technology using AI and digital platforms to deliver Ephesians 2:10 devotionals, translate Isaiah 43:1 globally, and foster Hebrews 10:24-25 communities. Megascale data centers, such as Xay's Colossus, 230,000 GPUs, and OpenAI's Stargate, 1.2 GW, process 181 zettabytes of data annually, supporting AI and cloud computing with 5,697 public facilities globally in 2025. These centers, particularly in Northern Virginia's Data Center Alley, 633 centers, 70% of global Internet traffic, enable scalable, low-latency solutions for faith-based initiatives. However, their energy consumption, 240 to 340 TWh, and ethical risks challenge alignment with Tov/Tob principles, necessitating a narrative approach that explores divine ineffability alongside technological power. CBRE, June 23, 2025. Point 3. Methodology. This white paper integrates theological exegesis of scriptures, example Psalm 139:16, Isaiah 55:8-9, Colossians 3:17, philosophical frameworks from apophatic and cataphatic theology, and technical data from CBRE, McKinsey, Data Center Knowledge, and IEEE, with web-based analyses conducted on August 31, 2025. A systems engineering approach details data center architecture, while narrative design frameworks propose literary strategies for your book. Quantitative metrics, example compute throughput, PU, and qualitative assessments of cultural and ethical impacts ensure a holistic analysis, aligning with the Gospel Geek Lab's mission to advance faith through technology. Point 4. Theological and epistemological challenges of defining God. 4.1 Divine transcendence and human finitude. God's infinite nature transcends human comprehension, as articulated in Isaiah 55:8-9, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord." Divine attributes omnipotence, omniscience, and eternity exceed finite cognitive capacities, which are bounded by sensory experience and rational frameworks. Apophatic theology, emphasizing what God is not, underscores this ineffability, as human constructs, example metaphors, doctrines, cannot fully encapsulate divine essence. For Gospel Geek, this suggests that data centers, despite their exaflop-scale compute, cannot fully model God's nature, framing a narrative tension between technology and divine mystery. Barth, 1957. Point 4.2 Linguistic and conceptual limitations. Human language, rooted in finite experience, struggles to define God. Terms like creator or father are analogical, limited by anthropomorphic constraints, as noted in Wittgenstein's philosophy of language. Meaning is context-bound, and divine reality exceeds linguistic boundaries. Cataphatic theology, which describes God positively, example God is love, 1 John 4:8, provides partial insights but risks reductionism. Data centers, processing petabytes of linguistic data, amplify this challenge by relying on structured datasets that cannot capture divine transcendence, necessitating a narrative focus on humility in defining God. Wittgenstein, 1953. Point 4.3 Cultural and historical variability. Definitions of God vary across cultures and eras, shaped by social, philosophical, and religious contexts. For example, Hellenistic influences shaped early Christian Trinitarian doctrine, while modern secularization, 29% U.S. nuns, emphasizes empirical epistemologies, distancing society from metaphysical claims. Gospel Geek's book can explore how data centers, as products of secular culture, reflect this variability, with characters navigating diverse theological perspectives to find universal truths. FAMI, 2025. Point 4.4 Secularization and modern epistemologies. The rise of secularism, with 29% of Americans identifying as religiously unaffiliated in 2025, privileges empirical and computational paradigms, as seen in AI's reliance on data-driven models. This clashes with theological epistemologies rooted in revelation, example Hebrews 1:1-2, making God's definition elusive. Data centers, processing 181 zettabytes, embody this tension, offering tools to explore faith but grounded in material frameworks, a key theme for Gospel Geek's narrative. Pew Research Center, 2025. Point 5. Role of megascale data centers in theological exploration. 5.1 Computational power for spiritual narratives. Megascale data centers, with GPUs, example NVIDIA H100, 4 flops, and TPUs, enable exaflop scale processing for AI-driven spiritual content. For Gospel Geek, facilities like Northern Virginia's AWS campus can power chatbots delivering Ephesians 2:10 devotionals, amplifying the digital shepherd's mission to make faith accessible through technology. Data Center Knowledge, January 24, 2025. 5.2 AI-driven theological insights. AI, hosted on data centers, can analyze scripture corpora, example Bible texts, to generate theological insights or translate Isaiah 43:1 into 3,500 plus languages. However, AI's empirical bias limits its ability to grasp divine mystery, a narrative tension for your book where characters grapple with technology's limits in defining God. IEEE, July 15, 2025. 5.3 Data Analytics for Community Engagement. Data centers process petabytes of social media data, example X, TikTok, to foster Hebrews 10:24-25 communities. Apache Kafka and Spark enable real-time analytics, informing Gospel Geeks outreach strategies, which can be depicted in your book as characters building faith-based forums. McKinsey, October 28, 2024. 6. Narrative integration into the Gospel Geek Labs Book 6.1 Plotlines exploring the ineffability of God. Techno-theological quest. A protagonist, inspired by the Digital Shepherd, works in a Northern Virginia data center to develop an AI that interprets Psalm 139:16. The plot reveals the AI's inability to fully define God, leading to a spiritual awakening about divine mystery, echoing Isaiah 55:8-9. Dystopian struggle. A megadata center's AI, controlled by secular forces, attempts to reduce God to algorithms, prompting Gospel Geek characters to restore Tov/Tob-aligned applications, symbolizing divine transcendence over human constructs. Mystery Arc. A hacker uncovers a hidden data center project aiming to model God's omniscience, facing sabotage and ethical dilemmas, reflecting the limits of computational epistemology. Data Center Frontier, December 16, 2024. 6.2 Character arcs grappling with divine mystery. The Digital Shepherd, a protagonist mirroring your role, manages a data center, wrestling with the tension between AI's power and God's ineffability, growing in humility. Colossians 3:17. The Skeptical Scientist, a data center engineer, rooted in empirical epistemology, encounters faith through Gospel Geek's AI devotionals, embracing divine mystery. The Community Leader, a believer, uses data center analytics to build Hebrews 10:24-25 communities, learning that God's essence transcends data-driven insights. IEEE, July 15, 2025. 6.3 Thematic reflections on faith and technology. Divine mystery versus computational limits. Explore how data centers, despite processing exabytes, cannot capture God's infinite nature, aligning with Tov/Tob's call for humility. Faith in a Secular Age. Address secularization. 29% Nuns, by depicting data centers as tools to counter spiritual disconnection, amplifying Gospel Geek's mission. Stewardship and Ethics. Highlight environmental impacts. 240-340 TWH, as a call to Genesis 2:15 responsibility, with characters advocating sustainable practices. McKinsey, April 27, 2025. 6.4 Symbolism of data centers as theological metaphors. Data centers as temples, portray server farms as modern sanctuaries of knowledge, with GPU racks symbolizing order and cooling systems evoking divine life, aligned with Tov/Tob. Servers as seekers, use servers' ceaseless processing as a metaphor for humanity's quest to understand God, limited by finite capacity. Fiber networks as connections, depict fiber cables as threads of divine purpose, linking communities in Hebrews 10:24-25 Fellowship, CBRE, June 23, 2025. 7 Challenges and Mitigation Strategies. 7.1 Balancing theological depth and accessibility. Challenge. Dense theological concepts, example apophatic theology, may alienate readers. Mitigation. Use relatable analogies, example God's infinity as an endless ocean, and character-driven narratives to make themes accessible, with glossary footnotes for depth. Barth, 1957. 7.2 Ethical use of AI in spiritual contexts. Challenge. AI risks reducing faith to algorithms, misaligning with Tov/Tob. Mitigation. Train AI on scripture-based datasets and implement NIST AI risk management guidelines, ensuring Philippians 4:8 alignment. IEEE, July 15, 2025. 7.3 Environmental impacts of data centers challenge: energy, 2.5 b metric tons CO2 by 2030, and water usage, 5 m gallons daily, conflict with stewardship. Mitigation, depict characters advocating for renewable-powered centers, example Dominion's wind farms, reflecting Genesis 2:15, McKinsey, April 27, 2025. 8 Recommendations for literary and missional integration. Craft a data center setting, set scenes in a Northern Virginia-inspired data center, describing GPU hums and fiber glow to ground the narrative in realism. Develop faith-driven characters, create protagonists like the digital shepherd, grappling with God's ineffability, to reflect Gospel Geek's mission. Incorporate social media, use X or TikTok as plot elements, with data center analytics boosting faith-based campaigns, mirroring your outreach. Explore theological tensions, highlight the gap between AI's limits and divine mystery, aligning with Isaiah 55:8-9. Promote sustainability, integrate renewable-powered data centers as symbols of Genesis 2:15 stewardship. Engage readers with symbolism, use data centers as metaphors for divine order, ensuring accessibility through vivid imagery and relatable arcs. 9 Conclusion. Defining God is challenging due to divine transcendence, linguistic limits, cultural variability, and secular epistemologies, a tension amplified by the empirical nature of megascale data centers. For the Gospel Geek Labs, these centers processing 181 zettabytes and powering AI with $7 trillion in projected investments by 2030 offer a platform to explore these challenges in your book. By integrating data centers into plot lines, character arcs, and themes, you can craft a narrative that reflects the ineffability of God while advancing Gospel Geek's mission of discipleship, evangelism, and community building, aligning with Tov/Tob principles and divine purpose. Bibliography. Barth, Carl. Church Dogmatics, Volume 2, The Doctrine of God. T. Clark, 1957. Wittgenstein, Ludwig. Philosophical Investigations. Blackwell, 1953. Fahmy, Dahlia. The number of Christian majority countries fell between 2010 and 2020. Pew Research Center, 2025. Global Data Center Trends 2025. CBRE, June 23, 2025. The Cost of Compute, a $7 trillion race to scale data centers. McKinsey, April 27, 2025. Data Center News Roundup, $500 billion Stargate Project. Data Center Knowledge, January 24, 2025. AI Power, Expanding Data Center Capacity to Meet Growing Demand. McKinsey, October 28, 2024. Data Center Networking, Technologies and Trends. IEEE, July 15, 2025. If you need specific plot outlines, character sketches, or deeper theological integrations for your book, let me know. Peace and blessings, my friend. Explore apophatic theology. Quantum computing theology. The difficulty humans face in defining God stems from several fundamental challenges that span philosophical, linguistic, and experiential dimensions. The problem of finite describing infinite. Human language and concepts are rooted in our finite, physical experience. We understand things through comparison, contrast, and analogy, but if God is truly infinite or transcendent, then our usual tools for definition break down. It's like trying to describe the ocean using only words for puddles. Categorical limitations. Our minds naturally categorize things as physical objects, abstract concepts, or relationships. But if God exists outside these categories, as many traditions claim, then our conceptual frameworks may be inherently inadequate. We end up using negative theology, God is not this, not that, because positive descriptions feel insufficient. The problem of experience. We typically define things based on observable properties or shared experiences. But religious experiences of the divine are often described as ineffable, personal, and beyond ordinary perception. This creates a gap between those who claim direct experience and those seeking rational definition. Cultural and historical variation. Different cultures, time periods, and religious traditions have conceived of the divine in radically different ways, from personal beings to impersonal forces, from singular to plural, from transcendent to immanent. This diversity suggests either that human understanding is limited or that the concept itself resists unified definition. The paradox of ultimate reality. Many philosophical traditions suggest that whatever is truly ultimate or foundational to reality might necessarily be beyond complete human comprehension, not due to lack of intelligence, but because finite minds may be structurally incapable of fully grasping the infinite. Projection and anthropomorphism. Humans naturally understand things in human terms, but this tendency may distort our conception of the divine, leading to the question of whether we're defining God or simply projecting enlarged human qualities. These challenges don't necessarily prove or disprove God's existence, but they do illuminate why the question of definition remains so persistently difficult across cultures and centuries. The difficulty of defining God lies in the profound complexity and diversity of human experience, belief, and understanding, as well as the nature of God being something often regarded as beyond the full grasp of the human mind. There are several factors that make defining God so elusive. 1. The limitations of human language and thought. Abstract and infinite, God, as conceived by many religious traditions, is often viewed as infinite, transcendent, and beyond the limitations of time, space, and even human perception. These qualities are inherently hard to define because language itself is bound by the constraints of our finite reality. Words and concepts that describe things we encounter in everyday life like good, powerful, or loving cannot fully capture something that exists beyond all of these dimensions. Metaphysical nature. Descriptions of God tend to be metaphysical, meaning they deal with concepts that aren't physical or directly observable. The human mind is typically more comfortable with tangible, measurable things. Abstract concepts like omnipotence or omniscience are hard to grasp in their full depth because they don't correspond to anything we can directly experience. 2. Diverse cultural and religious perspectives. Multiple religious traditions. Different religions have different concepts of God, each with its own attributes, names, and qualities. For example, in monotheistic religions like Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, God is typically understood as a singular, personal entity, while in Hinduism, God may be understood as a force that pervades the universe, or as many gods with distinct roles and personalities. Personal and collective interpretations. God's nature and attributes are often shaped by individual or communal experience, upbringing, and cultural context. For some, God is a deeply personal presence, while for others, God may be more abstract and impersonal force, principle, or cosmic order. These differences make it hard to pin down one universal definition. 3. God as a mystery. Faith in the unknown. Many religious traditions emphasize that God is a mystery, and to fully understand God would require a kind of knowledge that is beyond human capacity. For example, in Christianity, the idea of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, defies logical definition, yet it's central to the faith. The divine is often seen as something to be experienced through faith, prayer, and revelation rather than something that can be comprehensively explained. Transcendence and immanence. Some traditions describe God as both transcendent, beyond the universe, and immanent, present within the universe. The combination of these qualities makes it hard to define God because one is simultaneously asked to view God as beyond comprehension and yet present and knowable in the world. 4. Conceptualizing a non-empirical being. Non-empirical nature. God is often understood as existing outside the realm of sensory experience. Humans are accustomed to understanding the world through sight, touch, sound, etc., but defining something that cannot be empirically verified presents a major challenge. This makes the exercise of defining God not just a theological endeavor but also an existential one, as it touches on questions of belief, intuition, and the limits of reason. Experiential knowledge. For many, knowledge of God is experiential, something felt, perceived, or understood through direct experience, prayer, or meditation, rather than intellectual knowledge. This makes God difficult to define in objective, concrete terms. People may know God deeply, but struggle to articulate that knowledge. 5. The paradox of God's attributes. Contradictory qualities. Many descriptions of God are paradoxical. For instance, God is often said to be both all-knowing and all-loving, but how can this coexist with the presence of suffering and evil in the world? Or how can God be both immanent, present in the world, and transcendent, beyond the world? These paradoxes make it difficult to develop a clear, concise definition. Personal versus impersonal. Is God a personal deity with whom one can have a relationship, as in the Abrahamic faiths, or is God more of a universal force, like the concept of Brahman in Hinduism? How can something both be a loving parent and an uncaused, impersonal force? 6. God beyond conceptualization. Non-conceptual God. Many argue that God cannot be fully defined or confined to human concepts because any attempt to do so limits God's nature. In some philosophical traditions, especially mysticism, there's an understanding that to truly know God is to go beyond thought and language entirely. To define God would be to reduce the divine to human-made categories, which would be seen as inherently insufficient. Mystical and experiential knowledge. Some traditions, like Sufism, Islamic mysticism, or Christian mysticism, suggest that God is known best through direct, mystical experience, where language fails entirely. These experiences are often ineffable, meaning they can't be fully described using words and thus challenge traditional definitions. 7. The role of interpretation and metaphor. God as metaphor. In many philosophical or theological traditions, God is understood symbolically or metaphorically rather than literally. For example, describing God as love or light or truth conveys aspects of God's nature but doesn't define God exhaustively. This metaphorical approach leaves space for interpretation, which complicates defining God in any fixed or objective sense. Conclusion: God as beyond human definition. God, by nature, seems to transcend the capacity of human language, thought, and perception. Even though humans have attempted to define and describe God throughout history, the attempt often falls short of capturing the full scope of the divine. Ultimately, the struggle to define God may be an inherent part of the experience of trying to understand something that, by its very nature, exceeds human comprehension. Does this resonate with your thoughts or experiences around the concept of God? God is hard for humans to define because the concept involves profound mystery, transcends human categories, and is interpreted in vastly different ways by cultures and individuals. Inherent transcendence and mystery. Many traditions, like classical theism, hold that God is wholly incomprehensible, making full human understanding or definition impossible. Philosophers and theologians often state that ascribing traits to God runs into the problem of limits, since God is seen as ultimate and infinite. Language and finite minds cannot grasp or describe God's essence completely. Subjectivity and diversity of interpretation. Every culture, religion, and even individual forms a unique conception of God, resulting in many different and sometimes contradictory definitions. Attempts to provide too much detail lead to specificity problems, risking contradiction or exclusion, while vague formulations make the concept nearly meaningless or ambiguous. Philosophical and scientific limits. God is often posited as supernatural, outside or beyond natural phenomena and scientific methods of verification. Thus, traditional means of definition, proof, or falsification cannot apply. Some argue that talk of God is literally nonsensical in a technical sense because there's no universally accepted or empirically verifiable definition. Lived experience and interpretation. Encounters with the divine, awe, or transcendence are filtered through individuals' subjective experiences and cultural backgrounds, so no pure, universal concept emerges. Each experience is different and hard to standardize into a definition. Religious texts, mystical accounts, and philosophical works tend to hint at, rather than define, the divine, reinforcing the elusive and mysterious quality of the concept. In summary, defining God proves so difficult because the idea is ultimately about confronting the limits of human thought, language, and experience, and any attempt at definition is shaped by cultural, philosophical, and personal perspectives. Venice. The concept of God is notoriously difficult for humans to define due to a multitude of philosophical, theological, and experiential challenges. Here are some key reasons why defining God remains a complex and often elusive task. Transcendence and immanence. God is often described as both transcendent, beyond human comprehension, and immanent, present within the world. This dual nature creates a paradox that is hard to reconcile within human understanding. Infinite versus finite. God is frequently conceived as infinite in power, knowledge, and existence, while humans are finite beings. This vast difference makes it challenging for humans to fully grasp or define something so far beyond their own nature. Cultural and religious diversity. Different cultures and religions have vastly different conceptions of God, ranging from monotheistic, polytheistic, and even non-theistic beliefs. This diversity highlights the subjective nature of defining God. Language limitations. Human language, which is inherently limited and symbolic, struggles to adequately express or define something as profound and abstract as God. Many theologians argue that God is beyond the scope of human language. Personal versus impersonal. Some traditions view God as a personal being with whom one can have a relationship, while others see God as an impersonal force or principle. This dichotomy further complicates attempts at a unified definition. Mystical experiences. Many people's understanding of God is shaped by personal, mystical, or spiritual experiences, which are inherently subjective and difficult to articulate or quantify. Philosophical debates. Philosophers have long debated the existence and nature of God, leading to a plethora of theories and counter-theories that add to the complexity of defining God. Scientific and rational challenges. The rise of scientific thinking has led to questions about the compatibility of religious beliefs with empirical evidence, further complicating attempts to define God within a rational framework. Moral and ethical considerations. The role of God in moral and ethical frameworks varies widely, with some seeing God as the source of all morality, while others see morality as independent of divine authority. Historical and evolutionary changes. Human conceptions of God have evolved over time, reflecting changes in societal structures, technological advancements, and shifts in human consciousness. In conclusion, defining God is a task that challenges the very limits of human understanding and language. It requires navigating a complex landscape of philosophical, cultural, and personal perspectives, all while grappling with the inherent limitations of human cognition and expression. Defining God is challenging for humans because the concept often transcends human comprehension and experience. Here are key reasons why transcendence and mystery. Many religious traditions describe God as infinite, eternal, and beyond the physical world. Human language and cognition, shaped by finite experiences, struggle to encapsulate something boundless and abstract. Subjectivity and cultural variation. Perceptions of God vary widely across cultures, religions, and individuals. For example, monotheistic traditions like Christianity, Islam, and Judaism view God differently, while pantheistic or non-theistic systems like Hinduism or Buddhism offer contrasting perspectives. Personal experiences and cultural lenses shape definitions, leading to diverse interpretations. Limitations of language. Words are rooted in human experience, but God is often described as beyond physical or temporal constraints. Terms like omnipotent or omniscient are approximations that can't fully convey the divine nature, if it exists. Philosophical and existential questions. Defining God raises complex questions about existence, purpose, and morality. Philosophical debates such as whether God is a personal being or an impersonal force add layers of ambiguity. Skeptics and atheists further challenge the concept, arguing it lacks empirical evidence. Personal experience versus objective truth. Many define God through personal encounters, feelings, or spiritual experiences, which are inherently subjective. This makes a universal definition elusive, as experiences differ widely. The problem of evil and contradictions. Attempts to define God often grapple with paradoxes, like reconciling an all-powerful, benevolent deity with the existence of suffering. These contradictions complicate a coherent definition. In short, God's nature, whether as a being, force, or concept, resists clear definition due to human cognitive limits, diverse perspectives, and the inherent complexity of the divine. If you'd like, I can explore specific theological or philosophical perspectives on this topic further. Explore theological perspectives. Compare religious philosophies. The concept of God is difficult for humans to define for several reasons. Abstract and transcendent nature. God is often described as beyond physical reality and human comprehension. This transcendence makes it challenging to capture God's essence within finite language or concepts. Diverse religious and cultural perspectives, different religions, philosophies, and cultures have varied and sometimes conflicting understandings of God or the divine. This diversity complicates the creation of a single, universal definition. Limitations of human language. Language is inherently limited and often inadequate to fully describe infinite or divine qualities. Words may fail to convey the depth, mystery, and nuances of the divine. Personal and subjective experiences. Many people experience the divine personally, which can be deeply subjective and difficult to articulate or standardize in a definition that applies universally. Philosophical and theological debates. Over centuries, scholars and theologians have debated and interpreted God's nature, emphasizing different attributes such as omnipotence, omniscience, love, justice, which can lead to varying or even conflicting definitions. In essence, the divine's infinite, mysterious, and multifaceted nature makes it inherently challenging for humans to pin down a precise, universally accepted